everyone. Welcome to the session. This is Jennifer Cohens. I am the Executive Director with the Ontario Prader-Willi Syndrome Association. And today we are here to learn about positive behavior support. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your days to join us and learn more about this important topic. For those of you who aren't aware of OPWSA, we are an association that assists families throughout the life cycle of living with a child or a caregiver that's supporting an individual with PWS. And we do this through a number of different ways. We host family gatherings throughout the province of Ontario. We host our fall conference. Usually we like to host it in person, but we have had to move to a virtual space the past couple of years given the COVID situation. We also run a camp for individuals with PWS every year, and a number of different activities. So if anyone is unfamiliar with OPWSA, I encourage you to take a look at our website or reach out for more information. And I know we are all here to learn about positive behavior support, and we have a fantastic presenter joining us, Stacy Ward from PWSA USA. She's a phenomenal resource. I often reach out to her for advice as well. So I'm so glad she was able to join us. And without further ado, I will pass things over to Stacy.
Thank you, Jen. So before we start, I'd just like to thank OPWSA and Jen specifically for inviting me to speak to you guys today. There's a lot to cover when we talk about behavior. So this presentation could be several hours long, but we have an hour today. So I do encourage you to put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and I've saved some time at the end to answer those. If for any reason we're unable to answer all of the questions during that time, I'll share my email and my direct line and encourage you guys to contact me directly. I'm happy to speak with any of you and answer any questions that you may have. So as Jen said, my name is Stacy Ward. I'm the Director of Family Support for the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association USA. And it is absolutely a pleasure to be here. So during this presentation, our three main objectives are to define behavior, to understand how anxiety and sensory needs can affect behavior, as well as talk about those strategies and develop ways to manage those challenging behaviors that you may be experiencing in your home or in your residential setting. So what is behavior? Behavior is defined as anything that an organism does. It's not good, it's not bad. We all engage in behavior. So this cheetah is running. Running is a behavior. Driving my car is a behavior. Speaking is a behavior. It is anything that is observable and measurable. So we all engage in behavior all day long. What we're going to focus on is that maladaptive behavior that can affect quality of life. It can affect social situations, the things that you guys perhaps are struggling with your loved ones. So one of the things I like to stress, I often see anxiety listed as a behavior in a behavior plan. And I want to be really clear that anxiety is not a behavior, but anxiety does cause maladaptive behavior, especially in individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. So we know that many individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome experience high levels of anxiety as their baseline. And when they're feeling more anxious, you see behaviors based on that. So you may see things like perseveration, repeatedly asking questions or saying the same thing over and over again. That's perseveration. Skin picking can be caused by anxiety, can also be caused by other things. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you may see your loved one engage in increased skin picking when they're feeling anxious. Aggression can be both verbal, self-injurious, or physical, and that unfortunately can be a result of anxiety as well. Defiance, or it can be called lots of different things. Being compliant is a word that I'm not particularly a fan of, but I know can be used at times. All of those things can stem from anxiety. And then meltdowns. We all know what a meltdown or a tantrum looks like in somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome. And these can all be caused by the anxiety. So if you can help manage somebody's anxiety, you may be able to help decrease these behaviors related to that specific anxiety provoking situation. So we're going to talk about the principles of Prader-Willi syndrome behavior management, and how you manage Prader-Willi syndrome behavior is often different than other types of behavior. It's important to kind of maintain that PWS friendly environment, and that includes having food security and whatever that looks like for your loved one, whether it's a locked kitchen or locked cabinets or people representing food security. Food security is also helping understand what you're going to be eating, when the next meal is, what snacks are, and being consistent with that so that there's no questions around food. The PWS friendly environment is also very calm. It's quiet. Decreased stimulation is really helpful for that PWS environment and helping people manage their emotions. Establishing clear boundaries, being consistent in your routines and your expectations. Those things also decrease anxiety, but they're very, very helpful for individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. Communicating the rules, and then prevention is going to be key to prevent the behaviors. So we'll talk today about ways to prevent behaviors from occurring, maladaptive challenging behaviors. And then we'll also talk about what do you do when you're already in it? So how do you respond when somebody is engaging in either an unsafe or maladaptive behavior? So like I said, that PWS friendly environment, it is calm, being sure that your responses are calm. So when you want your loved one to be excited about something or you're trying to motivate them, that's when you want to be excited and animated and really increase that stimulation. But if you see that maybe perhaps they're feeling a little anxious, or you're have to change the routine in some way, you're going to want to lower that stimulation. You may want to keep the lights down a little bit lower, the TV a little bit lower, less screen time, things like that to kind of keep that status quo in the environment. One of the things that I think is most important in establishing a PWS friendly environment is building that trust. So it does not matter what this environment is, whether it is your home, a school, a caregiver, a doctor's office, any environment that an individual with PWS enters into, you want them to feel as that they can trust the people who are around them, that they feel safe with them. When individuals do not feel safe, they respond out of fear in really maladaptive ways and try to control what they can. So helping build that trust, making sure that your child or the person that you're working with or your friend trusts you and knows how you're going to respond. So you being consistent in your responses is going to help build that trust, and that's super important. Being consistent with your meal times and your snack times is also very helpful. I know that there are some families who are really blessed and they don't necessarily need to stick to a really clear structured routine. Dinner does not have to be exactly at 5 o'clock every night, but it does have to follow homework time. So when I say consistent meal and snack times, it doesn't necessarily mean that exact time. It means that it could mean that exact time, but for some people, it could just mean that it happens after something specific every day. So they know what to expect. They know when it's coming, and that there's not just random snack times or extra meals thrown in, and that they're also getting whatever that schedule may be. So whether it is 3 meals and 2 snacks, or 3 meals and 1 snack, that's always the same. That helps create that overall PWS friendly environment. You're going to want to establish clear boundaries. So when you do that, you want to establish boundaries around lots of things, but one of them is, what is acceptable behavior? What do you expect? So when you can, you want to avoid saying, don't do this, don't do that. So don't run in the hallway, don't hit your brother. Instead, you want to say what you expect to see. Nice hands, keep your hands in your lap. I want to see you talking, not yell, or I want to see you using your inside voice. Those types of things. Having expectations around, we wash our hands before we eat dinner. and communicating what those expectations are. Say what you mean and mean what you say. So as a parent, I know how difficult this can be. Sometimes we make veiled threats. Sometimes we say, if you do that, then we're never, ever going to do this. Try very, very hard not to do that. What your child is going to learn is that you don't mean what you say, which means even though you just said, we're not going to do that, if I ask 100 more times, you're going to change your mind and you're going to say yes. So really, as much as you possibly can, and I do recognize how challenging this can be, really say what you mean and mean what you say. Give choices whenever you can. So this is an area that I think is sometimes underutilized as a management strategy. Individuals with PWS have so much of their life that is controlled by other people. When they eat, what they eat, all of their doctor's appointments, their therapies, who they spend time with, what activities they participate in, what time they go to bed. They don't get necessarily a lot of choice throughout their day. So give them limited preferential choices anytime you can. So if it is time to get ready for school, you may want to say, do you want to wear the blue shirt or the red shirt? It's not, do you want to get dressed? We're going to get dressed. It's, do you want to wear the red or the blue? They're getting to make the choice and have a little bit of control, and you're getting what you want at the end. Bath time and shower time sometimes can be challenging. So the choice is, do you want to take a bath or do you want to take a shower? It's not, do you want to get clean? Being clear and avoiding ambiguity can be really helpful. So in general, and I do want to stress that everything that I'm saying is generalities. Every child is very, very unique. But there are some things that we just see in general help for individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. So avoiding saying things like we'll see or maybe, that provides just an unsure environment. It decreases that trust that you're building. So now they're unsure whether or not you're going to follow through on what you say. And along those lines, I think it's important to help be sure that when you do have to say no, and we all know that there's times we have to say no, but we change the way that we say that. The word no can be very triggering for people. So instead, when they say, I want to go outside and play at the park today, the response is, you know what, that sounds fantastic. First, we need to do this. Or I'd love to play at the park today too. But right now, we need to finish our homework. So you're still giving the same message that that's not what's going to happen, but you're not using the word no. The other thing that's super, super important is that you do not give in to those tantrums. So tantrums are really, really challenging to handle. Depending on the environment, they can be very embarrassing. If your child is having a tantrum or melting down in the middle of a store or at a family gathering or church, that can be embarrassing. But it's really important that you don't give into that instead you can wait them out. And we'll talk specific strategies around this. But the second you give in, what they've learned is if I yell louder, if I cry more, if I throw more things or I hit more people, you're going to say yes. So the ante gets upped because now they've learned that is the way to communicate and get access to what they're looking for. So creating those clear and consistent routines and expectations. You can use lots of different tools. So picture schedules are great for younger kids, especially kids who can't tell time, the order in which they do things. And you can use picture schedules even for specific tasks. So we really want to teach kids with Prader-Willi syndrome to be as independent as possible. So, and to feel independent as if they have some autonomy. So in this schedule, it has getting dressed as one of the items, and then eating breakfast, then cleaning up. You could break that down even further to include the steps of getting dressed. So if that's a challenge area for your child that causes some friction between you guys, or it takes a really long time for that to happen in the morning, perhaps what they need is really something to show them the steps that's very concrete for them. For older kids, helping set alarms in their watches, or if they have phones. I know not everybody has a phone, but there are some teenagers and adults with Prader-Willi syndrome that do have phones. You can set alarms in their phones that tell them what time things are happening, and they can look at that. Reward systems are really helpful with helping people maintain their routines and meeting their expectations. So you want to give them all sorts of reinforcement when they're doing exactly what they're supposed to. Rewards doesn't necessarily mean going to the store and giving a toy, or it's not always a sticker chart. It can be praise and a high five or a hug. As long as it's meaningful to the person that you're rewarding, it's a reinforcer. Routines and expectations sometimes change, and we all know that. COVID has taught us many, many things. One of them being what we thought was consistent routines and what to expect every day has to change sometimes. Presetting individuals, helping them understand that, you know what, I'm so sorry, but we now have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. This is what your day is going to look like. You're going to get up, we're still going to have breakfast before you go to school, and you're going to ride the bus to school, but I'm going to pick you up right after calendar time. And then we're going to go to the doctor. And this is what's going to happen at your doctor's appointment. And then after that, we're going to go back to school, and you're going to make it back to school right before lunch. So you're presetting them about what to expect, and you're painting the picture. It helps alleviate all of those unanswered questions that may be in their head. It also helps prevent them from creating a story of what's going to happen. So we've all been in those situations where your loved one has experienced something. They've gone to the park with grandma before, and then they stopped at the bank, and while at the bank, they were given a lollipop. Now you're going to the bank and they don't get a lollipop, and they're having a meltdown, and you have no idea where that's coming from because you weren't there when that happened before. Painting the picture helps them understand what to expect. Now this person is thinking, the last time I was at the bank, I got a lollipop. So every time I go to the bank, I'll get one. It's important to help them see what's going to happen. It's also important to admit when you've done something that was maybe a mistake, or grandma has, or another loved one, that we can't do that anymore. So you can say, you know what, I'm so sorry. I made that mistake. I made a really poor decision in that moment, and that's not what's best for you or me. So we're not going to do that next time. The next time we go to the bank, we're not going to get a lollipop. We're going to go to the bank, and I'm going to deposit my check, and then we're going to go do this. It's okay to model that behavior. We want our children to recognize when they make mistakes and know it's okay to make mistakes, and then also apologize. And if we're modeling that, we're teaching them how to do that. Creating rituals is that very same thing. It's that routine and that expectation. So rituals around what dinner looks like every night. It's washing your hands, it's setting the table, whether you do a family style meal or it's pre-served. Everybody's plates are already filled when they go on the table. Whatever those routines are and rituals are important. And they can be very, very different. Every family is going to do whatever is most appropriate for them. It's being consistent with that. That is what's important. And the use of social stories, schools are fantastic at this, but it's also something that can be done at home. So, creating a social story around going to the doctor, creating social stories around family gatherings, or new experiences that might be a little bit scary for someone. It's explaining what it's going to look like and going over that and helping them understand in advance. Appropriate behavior, what you expect around behavior, is also something that can be done in social stories. So social stories around feeling scared or feeling mad. We don't want individuals to think that their feelings are not okay. We need to be sure that we're validating feeling things and recognizing their own emotions as well as the emotions other people are experiencing. So we want to validate the emotion, but not the behavior. Communicating the rules. So we all have unsaid rules. That's really challenging for people with Prader-Willi syndrome. We want them to know what the rules are. The vast majority of people are rule followers. They want to please people. They want people to like them. So when you make rules, very often they will follow the rule. They're also going to make sure everybody else follows that rule. So their siblings, their peers, and you. It's also important that they know who the authority figure is. So in the home, it's the parents. Parents are the authority figures. In residential programs, very often it is whoever is at the top of that food chain. So it can be a program manager, or a supervisor, or director. That's who they see as the authority figure and they go to. Very often that authority figure has to pass authority on to other people in front of the person with Prader-Willi syndrome for them to now know they are also an authority figure. So this is important with babysitters or other family members that may step in and provide some care for your child while you're not there, making sure that they know they're now the authority figure and they're going to enforce those same rules. One of the rules that you may want to put in place is that parents can change the rules. But when you change those rules, you want to be sure that you're communicating with them, that the rules being changed and why. So we call this the flexible brain. We don't want, as providers and caregivers, to become so rigid that we increase the rigidity in our children and our loved ones. But we do want to capitalize on some of those things that can be considered maladaptive behavior. So that rigidity and adhering to rules and being so strict about the rules, we want to use that to our advantage with creating our own rules and expectations. One of the things that I have found very, very helpful is bringing them into the conversation when we're creating rules. So what rules do they think is important? And they can be very, very silly, but make it a rule. Make it so that they feel some ownership in following the rules. Buy-in is really important for everyone. We all know how important it feels to us when somebody takes our opinion and values our input. We want to do that for our loved ones with Prader-Willi syndrome as well. So consequences. Before we get into how to actually manage and respond to all of these different maladaptive behaviors, I want to talk about consequences for a second. So we often say that individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome do not respond effectively to any consequences, and that's not completely true. So what we know is negative punishment, which is the loss of any sort of desired activity. So taking away an iPad or taking away a visit or a trip that was planned. Those often are not effective. It can be difficult for them to tie that negative feeling that they now have to their behavior. And the same is with positive punishment. So positive punishment is when they're receiving something that's undesired. Also, not as effective. What is very effective is negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. So negative reinforcement is when you remove a negative stimulus. So if you're nagging your child to do something over and over and over again, and you've now perseverated on something, if you remove that stimulus, that nagging, and then they do exactly what you had wanted them to do, that's negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is giving them that positive praise. It's adding something positive, and the behavior follows that. So you tell them, you know what, you're really, really great at putting the dishes away. And I just love how you stack those plates. And then they put the dishes away and stack the plates. That's positive reinforcement. It's also the high fives and the hugs. Positive reinforcement is a little bit easier for people to understand, and the others kind of get mixed up, but they're all consequences to behavior. So now we're going to talk about specific tips for different maladaptive behaviors. So we're going to talk about meltdowns and tantruming, aggression, skin picking, perseveration, and repeated questions. I know this is a big topic, and many of the questions that were submitted in advance were around this. So we're going to spend some time on that. And then power struggles. So power struggles are those arguing and going back and forth and digging their heels in. And it could be us doing that as well, not just them. So tantruming, we all know what this looks like. And it's that, regardless of age, yelling and crying and throwing themselves on the floor, maybe throwing items in the environment. It's often very difficult to stop the tantrum once it has started. This is one of those things that it's really important to try to pick up on those signals in advance, that they're getting to that point where there's frustration and anger, and prevent it from happening. Doesn't always happen. And now we're here. So what do? The first thing is maintain safety. So it is crucial that you keep yourself safe and everyone around you, including the person who's having the tantrum. That may mean that you need to remove things in their area. So if they're on the floor and they're kicking and screaming, you may have to move a coffee table out of the way to keep them safe. You want to keep yourself at arm's length. You want to remain quiet and calm and give them some time and space to de-escalate. This is not the time to engage in a conversation, to try to ask what's wrong, talk to me, or say, you did this, this is your fault, you made this choice. It's not the time to have any of those discussions. It's not going to help the situation, and they're not cognitively going to be able to process that information. It's just not helpful. So just back off. Still, do not give in. Again, I know that this is very difficult, but don't give in. It will hurt you in the long run if you do. Act bored if you can. Look at a magazine. So I like this picture specifically in the slide because she has the magazine and it gives the appearance that she's engaged in something else. She's looking out of the corner of her eye to still make sure that somebody is safe. So you want to keep your eye on what's happening. Notice when they're calming. You may interject with just a little bit of positive reinforcement as they're calming. You're doing a great job using your inside voice. That was a great deep breath. Great job. Thank you for lowering your voice. But you're not going to do that often. It's not going to be repeated over and over again. It's, if the tantrum is 15 minutes, you may do that 3 times in the last 5 minutes. You don't want to add stimulation to that environment. We talked a little bit about that calm environment. It's super important that you make it even calmer when somebody is tantruming or having a meltdown. It's also important when you're looking at that environment to take into consideration those sensory needs. So is it really hot in here? Is it too bright in here? Is it too loud in here? Are there things that I can do to decrease that sensory input that my loved one is feeling in this moment? And that is something that I think that we should take into consideration all the time, not just while somebody is tantruming. We all know that in general, individuals with PWS have lots of sensory deficits and often respond in ways that are maladaptive because of a sensory situation. So we're not able to see what's causing that, but it's loud, and that can be upsetting, or they're cold, or they're too hot. Taking that into consideration, evaluating all of that in those moments while you're being quiet and looking bored. Aggression. There's lots of different types of aggression. There's verbal aggression. There's physical aggression. There is throwing things. So again, safety is first, always. When somebody is being physically aggressive, you want to protect yourself, protect the people around you, and protect them to the extent possible. Do not respond to aggression with aggression. So it is not effective to hit someone back when they have slapped you, or if your child bites, it's not effective to bite them back. The same with siblings. So I don't want to encourage, I'd like to actively discourage you from having a sibling bite their sibling back. It's not helpful. It just, again, reinforces that that's acceptable behavior. They don't learn that it hurts and to not do it moving forward. when you get to the point where somebody is, actively physically aggressive and it's more than just a slap or a hair pull and then it's over, you may need to really examine what's happening and what they respond best to. So physical restraint is not the answer. However, there are times that what your child is really craving is that hug. So what people have learned, especially in the adult world, is if they're physically aggressive, they get physical restraint, whether it's a hug or they're called lots of different things in different states and countries, but wraps or a takedown or any of those things, a restraint. But it's that deep compression. It's that sensory piece. It's that feeling safe. And you may be able to just say, you know what? Right now, it looks like you just need a hug. You just want somebody to hug you. But they need to have calmed down a little bit before you offer that. You don't want to offer that when somebody is walking up and punching you in the face. The self-injurious, I think, is happening a little bit more with the younger population. And that was some of the things that had come up in question. So, my child might be banging their head. It's really coming down to why. Why are they doing that? Very often it is either they're having difficulty communicating something. It's a frustration. Something is frustrating them and upsetting them. So we need to find out why and what that is in order to prevent that from happening in the future. If somebody is banging their head, you might be able to slide a pillow underneath that. If they're punching themselves in the face or they're biting their hands, you may be able to hold their hand and give them some of that same physical pressure and help them de-escalate. Verbal aggression is that yelling and screaming and sometimes name calling. Empathy works really, really well, not just with aggression situations, but really all maladaptive behavior. If you use empathy, you're going to get a lot further. So you can say things like, I know you're angry and I'm so sorry that you feel that way. And end it. Or, it was really hard today having to climb all those stairs. Or your homework is hard today and I know this is hard for you. That's okay. You can also say, you know what? I hear you. It's interesting that you feel that way without saying you're wrong. Part of verbal aggression often happens because they want to be right. They want to be heard. They want you to agree with what they're saying. In some cases, they have to have the last word. That's all okay. You can provide that empathy and validate that feeling without agreeing and without giving the impression that it's okay to yell and scream and name call. Praise them when they start to de-escalate and use a calm voice. When somebody's yelling, one of the techniques that works really well is to say to them, once you use your calm voice, I'll respond. Or I'm not going to respond until you use your calm voice. And then follow through. Don't respond, don't answer, don't engage. But as soon as they start to use a calm voice, you want to respond immediately and say, thank you for using your calm voice. That was great. I'm sorry you feel that way. Or I understand that was really hard for you. The other thing we really want to avoid is rehashing these behaviors. So, although we want to engage the use of social stories and appropriate behavior, we want people to know what we expect of them. We don't want to rehash it later that day, that specific instant, or even the next day. We don't want to say, remember when you hit me, or remember when you pulled your brother's hair, because that can reignite that behavior. They may immediately go back to you're angry with me, and then they respond maladaptively, or, oh yeah, I was really mad that my brother played with that toy and I wanted it, and re-engage in that sort of behavior. Skin picking. So we didn't actually have a lot of questions around skin picking, but I did want to put it in here because I do know that it is something that can be challenging for people. So It can happen for a variety of reasons, and anxiety is one of them, like we talked about at the beginning, but it can also be somebody's bored, or there's a sensory need, or it started out as they were just itchy. You know, that sensory piece where we've all been bitten by a mosquito and it's itchy and it's hard not to scratch it. Then it becomes a little obsessive and we're perseverating on it and we're scratching it more and more and it opens up and then we're picking at it. So it can happen for lots and lots of reasons. Some things that help is to keep bug bites and wounds covered. So preventing bug bites in the first place, you know, using some sort of natural bug repellent, clothing, long sleeves, pants, that sort of thing. But once they exist, using the use of Band-Aids or an anti-itch cream, keeping them covered, keeping nails short, and then also using a thick lotion to prevent dry skin. So if your skin is dry, it becomes itchy, and then you may scratch. And when your skin is dry and it's itchy and you scratch, it's more likely to open a wound or create a wound. So really keeping skin moist. And there are some lotions that almost make it difficult. So you don't necessarily look greasy, but they're thick and they're good. And it makes it difficult to really, on a fingernail, scratch that skin open. Keeping hands busy. So fidget things. If somebody has an interest in, you know, crocheting or knitting or puzzles or, you know, anything that you can do with your hands, keeping hands busy, doing something other than picking. And then providing lots and lots of positive reinforcement for not picking. Avoid saying things like don't pick, and instead phrase that in a positive, what you want to see. You know what? I'd love to see you helping me do this. Can you help me pick up all these newspapers? Can you help me stack these books so that their hands are busy doing something else rather than stop picking? Occupational therapy evaluations can be very, very helpful in this area. So the caveat to that is the occupational therapist really has to have a background in sensory needs and deficits. And sometimes it's difficult to find them. You know, here in the States, it may be difficult to find a therapist who has that sort of expertise and accepts Medicaid. But that can be very, very helpful. You know, there's all sorts of different sensory input that has been helpful, but brushing, and whether it's brushing skin or brushing hair, massaging, vibrating, vestibular motion, all of those things. So spinning, rocking, jumping on trampolines, all of those things can help decrease skin picking if the skin picking is a sensory reason. It also can actually help decrease anxiety, adding all of those different sensory input things. And in extreme cases, medication may be beneficial. There's a lot of mixed data right now around this. There are some anecdotal testimonies that there's some medications that have just been fantastic, and those same medications have not been effective for other people, and that's okay. We know medication affects people differently, but if you're really struggling and there's some significant wounds, you may want to explore medication with somebody. Now, perseveration and repeated questioning. So this is the thing that we get asked about the most. And I know it was something that was brought up repeatedly in the questions prior. So providing reassurance and empathy. So we talked about that. But part of that perseveration when it comes from anxiety really is because they're feeling unsure. They want to be sure that what they think is happening is happening. So again, painting that picture, doing all those things that we talked about earlier about the structure and expectations and painting the picture around events, making sure they know. And then also saying to them, I know that you're a little unsure about what's going to happen, and that's okay, but I promise you, this is what it's going to be. You're going to have your dinner tonight, or we're still going to go do whatever that desired activity is that they want to do. Redirection can sometimes be effective. It depends on what they're perseverating over and how engaged they are in that perseveration. So if it's one of those obsessive thoughts, or it's more of the obsessive things, redirection may not be effective. Referring back to the rules and the schedules can be. one of the things that I find to work really, really well is giving limits on how often or how many times you're going to answer a question. So what has worked for me and other providers that I'm aware of, answering a question 3 times. And the first time you answer it, and you remind them, I'm only going to answer this 3 times. This is first time. The answer is X, Y, and Z. When they ask it again, I'm going to answer this 1 more time. Here's the answer. You'll get 1 more time, but you know what? I want you to tell me that you know the answer, and have them repeat the answer back to you. On the 3rd time that you answer it, also write it down. Now, this is effective if somebody is able to read the answer, but you answer it the 3rd time, you tell them this is it. I'm not going to answer it anymore because I know you know the answer. You told me that you know the answer, but just to help you feel a little bit safer, I'm going to write it down and you have that answer with you. So when you want to ask the question again, I want you to read the answer because I'm not going to answer it anymore, and then stick to that. In the beginning, they're going to ask more and more. Over time, they will learn that if you're consistent with that you're just not going to answer, and they'll stop asking. It's also okay to say, you know what, I need 10 minutes of quiet right now because I need to do this, or I feel a certain way. Communicating your needs as well is important. Again, it's that modeling appropriate preferred behavior. So it's okay to do that and then walk away. Power struggles and arguing. So this happens a lot with siblings. It happens with peers. It can happen in schools. It can also happen with you as the authority figure. So pick your battles. You know, if your child says to you, the sky is purple, your response is, you know what, that's a great shade of purple. Or what shade of purple do you think that is? I think it looks a little bluish. But don't argue with them. If it's not something that's going to matter in 5 minutes, 5 years, anything, it's not worth the battle. You're never going to win an argument with somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome. If they all could be lawyers, what a great way to use their skill. You're just not going to win. So pick those battles. Now, if it is something that they can't win on, don't make it an argument. Just make it very black and white. This is how it's going to be. So if it's, you've asked them to turn off the television and they're not doing it, don't ask repeatedly. So you may ask 2, 3 times, but you don't want to engage in that perseverative behavior. So again, it's that modeling. We're not going to answer their questions more than 3 times. We're not going to ask them to do something more than 3 times. Instead, what you do in that moment is say, I see you're really struggling to do that, so I'm going to help you. And I'm going to turn off the TV with you and bring them with you to turn off the TV. Now, if they're not getting up to go with you to do it, just turn it off. You can, again, use that empathy without agreeing. We already talked about trying to find ways to avoid saying the word no and then modeling that behavior. Now, when it comes to siblings and trying to help siblings not engage in this, it's challenging. It really is with kids of all ages. So helping your sibling understand, your other child, I'm sorry, your loved one with PWS, their sibling, understand that it's not helpful to get in these power struggles with their brother or sister with Prader-Willi syndrome, and then provide them lots of reinforcement when they don't. It doesn't mean that their feelings aren't going to be hurt. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be challenging for them. It is, but really providing them with that positive reinforcement when they are being appropriate and not engaging. And then spend some extra time with them one-on-one, helping them understand that their brother or sister can't help a lot of these feelings, and that teaching them how to be empathetic can make the situation decrease, and maybe they won't feel as pressured to get into those situations with their siblings. So I wanted to leave 15 minutes for Q&A, and that's where we're at. The one thing I did want to go back to just really quickly is around those reinforcements that we're talking about. I strongly encourage you not to use food as a reinforcement. Using preferential scheduling is certainly appropriate and can be very helpful. So having snack or meal times, which is that preferred activity, scheduled after a unpreferred activity, perhaps doing homework or a particular chore or something that they just don't want to do. Providers a lot of times will schedule meal times after perhaps exercise. That's creative scheduling. What's not okay is to say, you know what, you did a great job using your inside voice and your calm voice. So you're gonna get, so here's an extra food treat. It just provides that hope and decreases your food secure environment. So I did want to kind of throw that out there. I know most of you probably know that, but I think it warrants just reiterating that. So Jen, I don't know if there's questions in the Q&A or the chat.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Stacy, for all of that amazing advice that you've provided so far. We will have the chat window and Q&A option open for you guys to add more questions in, but while you're brainstorming what your questions are, I'll go to some of the questions that we've received in advance, and Stacy, perhaps you can respond to some of those. So one of the questions we got, and I think this is something that I've heard other times as well, is that individuals with PWS, they're very friendly and like to talk to everyone that they might meet, whether they're strangers or not. And so how do you try to either prevent it or limit what that could look like when you're out and about in the community?
Great question. You're right. I think this happens all the time. So a couple things. I think it's painting that picture. So if you know this is somebody who actively approaches strangers and says hi, or can I hold your baby? That's something that we see a lot of adults want to do, or pet your dog. Social stories can be helpful. So teaching them appropriate social interactions in the community in advance. It's that preventative thing, but also painting the picture in advance. So we could say, you know what, we're going to go to, I'm not sure what stores you guys have in Ontario, but we're going to Walmart today, and there's going to be lots of people there, and there might be some people with babies, and there might be some people with service dogs. Today, we're just going to say hi as we walk by, because they're working. That service dog is working. I see this a lot with animals having a hard time understanding that it's not okay to walk up and pet animals. So having that discussion, but really presetting it, and you may want to set a limit. You know what? We'll say hi to 3 people. But we're really in a big hurry today. So we have to say hi, and then we have to go get this, and we have to go get that. And providing lots and lots of verbal praise when they're able to just say hi and keep walking. Or if you get through the store and they haven't stopped a stranger to engage in any sort of conversation. And it's a fine balance, because I do think it is something that can be taken too far and put people in dangerous situations, especially if there isn't somebody there to help model appropriate behavior and monitor that interaction. But at the same time, we could all use a friendlier society. So, maybe it's teaching smiling and waving may be okay, but let's not walk up and engage in a conversation with them. So some of it is your comfort level too. And right now I find people use COVID is a really great tool for this, because our kids understand that being sick can be scary. So, it's not safe for us to really engage with strangers, because they may not be feeling well, and we don't know that, and we don't want to get them sick, and we don't want to share our germs with them, and we certainly don't want to get theirs. So I found people have been really creative with this of late, thanks to COVID.
Thank you. So we've had a couple of questions come in, so I'll transition to those. One is around clarification around whether time out is an option, or is that a negative reinforcement?
So I think it depends why we're using timeout. So we all need time away sometimes where we're feeling overstimulated or we're frustrated and we don't want to respond inappropriately. So I think if you're using it as a punishment, they're not going to understand the connection. However, if you see that they are overstimulated or perhaps behaving in a way that's unsafe, you can remove them from a situation and explain that because you're being unsafe, I need you to stay right here. It's not super effective if it's just used as a punishment rather than that safety and again, that expectation piece. You can also say, I see that you're feeling really angry right now. So I want you to just sit right here and maybe give them something that helps calm them. And then, so it can be a timeout or a time away from you and the environment, but it's not, you need to sit in timeout because you did this. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks for that clarification. I did want, one of the follow-ups is like reading a book in a chair to calm down. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask this, and I'm hesitant to open a can of worms, but you talked about, tantrums at home and aggression at home and, strategies around that. But perhaps you could spend a bit of time of what it might look like if you're in a tantrum in public, because obviously the strategies of, just letting it play out might not necessarily be the situation that everyone's comfortable with. So if you could maybe touch a little bit on that.
Sure. Age makes a huge difference in this situation. So if you have a toddler who's tantruming, you can pick them up and remove them. If you have a 28-year-old who's tantruming, it's a little bit harder to physically remove them from that environment. So yeah, this is a tough one, and it's embarrassing, and you run into really well-meaning bystanders who perhaps attempt to intervene or engage with your child or your loved one and make it worse. Or if the person is perhaps saying, I'm so hungry and I want whatever the food item may be, and you can't give in to that, bystanders don't understand that. Here in the States, we have some cards that we offer for families that kind of explain what PWS is for those very environments. You're handing it to perhaps a law enforcement officer that gets called by someone else so that they understand what's happening. I would say wait it out as much as you can. Now, if it is unsafe, you're going to probably need to call law enforcement yourself to maintain everybody's safety. But if they're just on the floor yelling, it is one of those difficult situations where waiting it out long term will be the best approach. In that moment, it's very, very difficult. And I totally understand not wanting to do that. But you pose a couple of risks if you try to physically remove them, especially older adults or teenagers that you just aren't physically able to pick up and carry out like you can a toddler. You may get hurt, they may get hurt. Other allegations end up being made in situations like that by bystanders. Some of that trust gets broken down. So it's not ideal for anyone. Nobody wants to be in those situations, but if you can, wait it out.
Thank you.
Not what everybody wants to hear. There is definitely not a magic answer for that one.
Fair enough. I am conscious of time, so I just want to quickly run through a couple of wrap-up pieces, and then we can stay on for a little bit extra time to answer any other questions. So by all means, I'm not kicking anyone out, but I am aware of people's timing and if you've only allocated the hour. So just give me one moment to run through a couple of slides that I wanted to share, and then we'll get back to some questions. So first, I'd like to let folks know that right now we are running our Cheers to Charity raffle fundraiser. It's a really great fundraiser for us. All the proceeds go towards assisting our key programmings like PWS Week at Shadow Lake, our First Trike program, Fall Conference, our free fridge lock program. It's $10 a ticket, and the grand prize is $1,000 worth of gift cards to a store of your choice from a list of stores. And these are all kind of big box stores like Best Buy and Costco and things like that. And you can also choose the denominations you'd like for your gift cards. So for example, if you won the $500 worth of gift cards, you could get a bunch in $50 gift cards, so you can give them out as gifts and things like that. So it's a really great fundraiser. If anyone's interested in purchasing tickets, you can contact me, or if you're interested in selling tickets on behalf of OPWSA, you can also reach out to me. I did want to flag a couple of other sessions that we have going on this week as part of our virtual conference. Cindy Zapax, who is another fantastic presenter, and she's presented at a couple of previous conferences of ours. She's doing a session around understanding Prader-Willi syndrome and autism and the differences, the overlap, etc. And I think it will be a really interesting presentation. So I encourage you to sign up for that. That's on Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Also on Friday, we have our virtual dance party, and this is another free event. We have Michelle Hillier from Experience Group that's going to be doing a dance movement session for 30 minutes. Just a great fun activity for individuals with PWS and their siblings or supporters to be involved in. So I certainly encourage you to register for that session, as it's a really good way to be active, but also having fun. So if you're interested in either of those sessions, you can go on our website and register for them there. And I do want to thank all of you for joining us today. And again, as I said, we'll keep the room open for a little bit longer to answer any other questions that come through, as well as tackle some of the ones that we received in advance. But I did want to go through those pieces for those of you that do have to sign off early. So another question that came through, Stacy, was around issues with respect to toileting at school. The parents believe that it's behavioral, as it isn't happening elsewhere. She's having accidents or on purposes up to 6 or more times a day. So how to diminish the unacceptable behavior?
So that's a great question. And I tend to agree that if it's only happening in that environment, there's one of two reasons. It is intentional and most likely an avoidance behavior, or they are something is causing her to have these increased accidents. So either she has increased access to fluids and isn't being able to utilize the restroom, which is unlikely. It really is more likely that it's behavioral. So typically, if somebody is having that level of accidents, or as you said, on purposes, I like that phrasing, they're trying to avoid something or gain access to something. So I would ask questions such as, when that occurs, what are they doing? Is it during academic time? Is it during therapy time? Is it essentially during unpreferred activities? The other question is, then what happens? Where do they go? Do they get to go to the nurse's office to be changed? Is there a different staff personnel who comes in to assist them? But there's some reinforcement that they're getting from this behavior that needs to be identified. And once you know what that is, then you can manage the behavior. If they're just trying to avoid work, it'd be important to make sure that that work still has to occur, regardless of the accidents or on purposes.
And I think what you said, it's important to know what's happening afterwards, because I've heard a similar situation, different sort of predecessor, wasn't the accidents, but one of the behaviors was getting to spend time one-on-one in the principal's office, and that was seen as a reward. So yeah, so it's important to kind of know what's going on. Or is it that mom has to come to the school and drop off more clothes? perhaps it's just an extra time to see mom.
You just brought up a great point. So we see that oftentimes schools here in the States, when somebody is engaging in maladaptive behavior, will call the parents to come pick them up. And that increases maladaptive behavior because they want to go home. They get out of having to do everything. So yeah, that's a great point, really exploring that.
So there was a follow-up around clarification. It seems to want more individual attention from the EAs. So it happens in classes that she likes in recess and things like that. One of the things that, looking at the positive reinforcement side of things, and Stacy, you could tell me if I'm off base or whatever, but perhaps it's looking at whether EAs could spend some extra time on the times where she's not having these accidents to help
Absolutely.
build that.
Yes, and having them be the person who's providing that praise for going a certain amount of time without an accident. If there's 6 accidents a day, that here, at least the school day is about 6 hours. Is that the same for you guys?
Yeah, about that.
So an accident an hour is pretty expensive. So maybe the reinforcement period is 30 minutes. You've gone 30 minutes without an accident, and whatever that praise or reinforcement looks like coming from them. And then perhaps it's somebody different who then addresses her and handles the accident once it occurs. If it is about that one-to-one with them, maybe it's somebody different that she doesn't have as great of a relationship with or a bond with.
Great suggestion. All right, I'm going to go to some of the other questions that we've received. So this is something that we received in advance, and it's something that I've also heard other families talk about around an individual with PWS talking to their siblings, and they tend to boss them around and that sort of stuff. So how do we help prevent them from bossing their siblings around and just communicating more effectively rather than yelling, screaming, bossing, etc.?
Again, it's a lot of that preemptive practicing, and also making it clear the expectation is. So as the parent, you're the authority figure, not them, even if they're older than the siblings. Although with this particular behavior, I don't think age matters. I think in general, individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome exert control where they can, and telling people what to do is a way that they can take control over a situation. So some of it is helping them have control in other areas, really emphasizing what their role is with their sibling. And what your role is. So maybe it's teach through social stories, if you can, teaching them that, if there's something that they feel their sibling should be doing and they're not, that instead their role is to come to you and tell you rather than telling them what to do.
Perfect. There were a couple of questions related to food. So I'll just kind of go through that, and
Sure.
You can touch on it. So one is around impatience with respect to food, and crying when the parent steps away to go to the washroom, or even sitting down and having like a lunch or meal with the individual with PWS. And then the other question related to food is how to present it when getting a plate ready. Would you suggest plates with separators? And I do know a number of families utilize that to indicate exactly what sort of portions people are getting. But yeah, so food in general.
Food in general. Okay. So having that food schedule is really helpful for this. So, when somebody is starting to, we see this if there's a snack after school, when they first get home, and maybe the snack is after they do homework and they're getting a little whiny, or there is no snack after school and they're ready for dinner, and start to cry a little bit and say, I want dinner, I'm hungry. Reminders that this is when we eat. But one of the things that I do think, especially with children, that we need to be cognizant of is sometimes they may actually be hungry. So as children developmentally grow, what their body needs, regardless of Prader-Willi syndrome, will change a little bit. It's not the same as a child without Prader-Willi syndrome, but there are, times that their calories may need to be increased, or what they're eating may need to be increased to kind of be more sustainable for them. So I don't want to dismiss that there is the chance that they may actually be hungry and need more intake. But in general, if it's just kind of that constant, most likely they're not secure in what the schedule is and what they're getting. So that increased communication around this, whether it's a picture schedule or even telling them what we're going to eat next. Now, I will say that sometimes too much information can be problematic as well. So you don't want to go so far that you're sharing a menu for the next 3 weeks. That's not going to be effective. But the breakfast is right after this or at this time, and really being clear with that. And again, the age of the person, so I'm not sure how old these children are, but that makes a big difference as well in what they can comprehend. If it's toddlers, the picture schedule may not even work. So it's just a lot of that verbal reassurance that, in just a few minutes, it'll be time, or right after this, it'll be time. And then with toddlers, redirection works much better than it does necessarily with teenagers or adults.
And I wanted to highlight something that you and I had talked about a number of years ago when a family had reached out around, after school, their child was always getting, in a tantrum around extra food before dinner. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you had mentioned was, if you're always giving in and they're going to get that snack anyways, maybe that's just that's just snack now, is preemptively don't have that tantrum, and now you've built in that snack if you're always going to be giving in anyways.
Right. The other thing to keep in mind, especially in those situations, is what time do they eat lunch at school? So for some students, it's very, very early in the day at 10:15 or 10:20, at least here in our school districts. And then kids are getting home at 3:30 and haven't had anything. That's a long time for really anybody to go without having something. So you may have to adjust the food schedule as well, based on what their other routine may look like, whether it's school or camp, or, as much as we don't like to, for one day at a time, adjust a routine, but sometimes doctor's appointments force us to adjust it a little bit. A doctor's appointment runs really long, those unexpected things. And that's where it's really important to have a conversation with your loved one about this. You know what? Because our appointment today went super long at the doctor's, we missed our lunchtime, and I know I'm hungry, you must be too. So today we have to have lunch right now, but tomorrow it's going to be the same time it's supposed to be. So having that conversation, really assuring them that you're in control, that you've got this, you're going to make sure that they get what they need.
Great, thank you. So there was a clarification to the question around food. So I believe it's a younger child, a toddler, who cries when the parent steps away after, say, giving a spoonful of a meal and then steps away to use the washroom or something. And whether that child is too young to start the behaviors, or, if you have any advice for that sort of situation.
So if it's in the middle of giving like spoonfuls as part of the meal, normal behavior for them to get upset if you walk away during that. And that's normal for any toddler, not just Prader-Willi syndrome. So it's very, very rare to see hyperphagic behaviors at the toddler age. You may see a little bit of a preoccupation with food, but we don't see a lot of kids who are true hyperphagic at that age. So I would say it's most likely more of that toddler behavior, but I do think this is the time to create healthy meal settings. So when we sit down to eat, we sit down and we eat, we don't do other things. And I know that can be difficult as busy parents. We're doing lots of things at one time, but this is the time to kind of really create that behavior, because what they're going to do later, if we don't now, is want to kind of eat while doing their own activities. So they want to watch TV and they walk away to watch, 5 seconds of the cartoon, and then they come back and they want another bite, and then they go and they pick up their dolly and they come back and they want another bite. That's not behavior we want to create or have them expect that that's what mealtime looks like. So this is where you really want to create that PWS friendly mealtime. I hope that's helpful.
That's great, thank you. So just shifting gears, a question came through around how to get the individual with PWS unstuck in a particular situation where you don't have necessarily a lot of time to wait it out. So for example, if the individual is supposed to be going into a program and is not wanting to go in because they're stuck on something else, any tips for those sorts of situations?
Random, once in a while type of situation, humor can be fantastic and a great distractor. So in the more outrageous and absurd your humor is, the better. If you're in the car and you're sitting outside the program and you're trying to get them in and you say, "Oh my gosh, did you just see that elephant walk down the hallway inside?" They're distracted for a second. I mean, it's got to be absurd. But if this is consistent, if this is happening all the time, there's a bigger issue going on, and we want to know why. What is happening in that environment that makes them not want to be in there? Or what are they doing in the environment they're currently in that they're enjoying that they don't want to leave? So it's not as simple as just getting unstuck. I'm sorry. It's figuring out why they're stuck in the first place if it's an ongoing issue. But humor can be so helpful in those once in a while type of situations. Now, the caveat with humor is most people with Prader-Willi syndrome do not understand sarcasm very well and sometimes aren't able to pick up on those little nuances. So I tend to be a very, very sarcastic person, and I had to really be careful with that, working with the people that I did with Prader-Willi syndrome, because it can come across as offensive. They're not picking up that it's humor, and we certainly don't want to cause any hurt feelings or make a situation worse. So that the absurdity type humor and really just outlandish stuff works as a distractor and a way to redirect. And you may get, "You're so crazy," and they're focused on how crazy you are rather than not wanting to go in anymore.
Thank you. So I'll take maybe one or two more questions just because I'm conscious of everyone's time, and I actually have a session starting at 1 that I'll need to get set for as well. But one question that came through was around ways to prevent other sort of maladaptive behaviors like emptying shampoo bottles and things like that, just for the sake of doing that. And any suggestions on how to help prevent that?
Find other things for them to empty. So if it's about the pouring or the sensory of squeezing those bottles, find things for them to squeeze where they're getting that same input. If it's about just kind of being an instigator, which sometimes it is, if you get a really big reaction from somebody, you're going to keep doing it. I had a friend who says he says it all the time. Attention is attention, whether it's positive or negative. So if they're just looking for a reaction, they're going to do whatever it takes to get it. So the least reaction you give is better. And again, that's that responding very calmly with disinterest that we spoke about earlier. But if it's more of that motion or seeing the things pour out, find ways to replicate that so that they're still getting that, but in a healthier way and less expensive. Shampoo bottles, the cost of shampoo can be very expensive if you're just pouring it down the drain. We certainly don't want that. Sometimes it is that squeeze, and OT can really help with that, but there's lots of Play-Doh and silly putty, and there's actually even these exercise things for the squeezing that you can do, or exercise bands that you can stretch with. If it's more about that, it's finding substitutes to give them that same satisfaction.
Perfect. I'm just kind of glancing over some of our questions that we received in advance just to see if there's any others that we didn't really touch on.
There's been a lot of really great questions submitted. Thank you guys for your participation. I appreciate it.
Okay, I'll just throw out a random one because I think we've gone through everything that we received in advance. What is, I guess, the most common question that you get, and how would you respond to it? Because I know you talk to so many families around the US and everywhere, and answer my questions and things like that.
So we get a lot of questions in the home environment around chores. So how do I get my child to clean up their bedroom, to be an active part of this household? And then in school systems, it's about staying on task a lot. We see a lot about, they're distracted, they're not doing their work. Occasionally there's the aggression, but it's more about that on task behavior. So at home, the things I suggest is talking about, realistic expectations. So if I don't feel like vacuuming today, I don't have to in my house. And understanding that sometimes they just may not want to. They just don't feel like it. And once in a great while, that's okay, but not always. So I found that it's effective to have like a get out of jail free pass kind of thought, that always a choice. So your chores today, everybody that lives here, and I'll use an example I use in my own home. We all live here together. We all have a responsibility for the upkeep of this home. So you can either put your clothes in the laundry basket, or you can help me fold the towels. So it's, again, offering a choice, but it's not nothing as an option. And then maybe once a month, they can use that. Today, I just don't feel like doing anything. The other thing is being age appropriate in your expectations. So, expecting a 10-year-old who goes to school all day and then perhaps goes to therapy or some other extracurricular after school activity and then has homework to then also do 2 or 3 chores every day might not be realistic. At that point, they're probably exhausted, keeping in mind the hypotonia and just the fatigue that's associated with Prader-Willi syndrome. So having realistic expectations is important. But those realistic expectations should include, we all have a responsibility. So, maybe the chore is making their bed every day and lots of praise when they do it. So I think one of the things that we've undershadowed a little bit is how that positive reinforcement and praise can be really, really beneficial all the time. But what happens is once people are meeting the expectations, we forget to continue to give it. So it's, why should I tell them they're doing a great job? They should be doing that. And although I understand that perspective, people with Prader-Willi syndrome thrive on that positive reinforcement. So continuing to tell them they're doing a good job and thanking them for doing their chore or whatever it may be will increase the likelihood that they're going to continue to do it. For staying on task type behaviors in school, a lot of times it's just too much at once, so chunking work, or again, that escape behavior similar to the accidents. If they can avoid it, they've learned doing other things allows them to not have to do that anymore, and they're getting some other reward. So again, still trying to figure out why they're avoiding things in the school system. Is the purpose of behavior will tell you how to respond and how to still give people that same input that they're looking for. So understanding why is super important for every environment.
Perfect. I am going to ask one more. I'm not going to let you off the hook yet. This is more around obsessive compulsive behavior. And I know we've talked about it in terms of, rigidity a bit with scheduling and, the importance of keeping a schedule. But I think it would be good if we could touch on strategies with dealing with obsessive compulsive behavior, as well as even one of the ways that we see it with individuals with PWS is hoarding and, some strategies around that.
Mhm.
And I swear this will be the last question.
No, I appreciate it. Hoarding is definitely something that we see a lot as part of that obsessive compulsiveness. It's this obsessive thinking. So a lot of the individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome don't actually have a true obsessive compulsive diagnosis, but they have a lot of the tendencies, and more of the obsessive than the compulsive. So the hoarding piece, I think it's important to set those limits and those expectations. So we see people hoard magazines, puzzles, dolls, hopefully things that aren't necessarily something that's going to cause filth or, a health hazard, but having limits around it. So you can have this many. If you want another one, we need to get rid of one first, and holding firm to that. So you may have to, if it's things like pencils or something smaller that can be, brought into the house in a way that you may not readily see. I mean, you can see a big stuffed animal coming in. But if somebody's got a pencil in their book bag, you may have to do weekly checks. So make that part of your routine. Every Saturday, we're going to go through, and you can know that if you have more than 15 pencils, you have to decide which of those that you're going to give up. And maybe we find ways to give them to donating them somewhere, or making the individual feel as if they have a little bit of a choice in where it goes, and something that makes them feel good. So in my experience, I have found that people can be very, very compassionate and empathetic, even though there is a little bit of that egocentrism there, when they think they're helping somebody that they perceive as less fortunate than them. They're doing a good deed. So use that to your advantage when you are trying to help them remove, if they're over the limit that you've established. But first you have to establish that limit. And then you have to make sure that everybody in your life knows what that limit is. So if you set the limit at 10, whatever it may be, grandma and grandpa can't then gift them 10 or 2 or 3, or every time they stop by, they're giving them something, because it makes that issue much more difficult to manage. So everybody has to be on the same page as well. I hope that's helpful.
Definitely.
Good.
Thank you so much, Stacy, for sharing your wisdom, taking the time to be here. I always love listening to you speak, and I've had the pleasure of seeing you at a couple of conferences, and you always do such an amazing job. And I know you're a fantastic resource for families, and certainly, as I mentioned, a fantastic resource for me. And I know earlier you mentioned that you'd be willing to share your email address. Would you mind popping that in the chat?
Sure,
for
happy
folks?
to.
And I just wanted to let our participants know that, again, this session has been recorded, and Stacy has also agreed to share her slide deck. So we will be posting that on our website probably within about 2 weeks' time. So thank you again, Stacy. Thank you to all of our participants. Pleasure to have you here, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.